Out of all the Great Lakes, there are three that I find particularly fascinating. Lake St. Clair, even though it's not really one of the Great Lakes. Lake Ontario, due to its deep depth. And Lake Erie, because of the fact that it is so shallow, yet has a lot of giant cities on the coast of it, like London, Cleveland, and Buffalo. And no, not that London. Despite the fact that Lake Erie is super shallow compared to other giant lakes in Canada, like the Okanagan Lake or Lake Winnipeg, there is still one mystery that has captivated Great Lakes shipping till this day, and that is the mystery of the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2. The Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 was created by the Marquette and Bessemer Dock and Navigation Company in 1905. The design of the ship mimics a lot of Great Lakes ferries that some may be familiar with, like the Pierre Marquette 18, as well as the Milwaukee. Both also met untimely deaths. This is because they were all a similar design called the Logan boat, a steel hull boat that was revolutionary for not just the Great Lakes, but shipping in general. In her brief 4 years as a car ferry on Lake Erie, she became very popular and was well beloved with her crew, the company, and Lake Erie shippers in general. At 10:43 in the morning of December 7th, 1909, the Marquette and Bessemer No. 2 departed Conneaut for its regular route to Port Stanley. At the time, she was carrying 30 loaded railway cars. She was also carrying one lone passenger who hopped on right at the dock of Conneaut as the ship was pulling out of its berth. And that's it. That's basically the end of the story of the ship. It departed, and it was never seen again. Alright, I'd be lying if that was the end of the story, because witnesses did in fact see the ship. About 2 hours later, someone in Port Stanley noticed a red and green light of the ship. They then signaled with a light that it was coming too close to shore, and then only saw a white light. This meant that the ship was now turning back out to sea. Alright, that has to be the end of the story, right? Well, kind of. You see, from then on, no sightings were ever seen of the ship. It's likely the ship tried to take refuge somewhere. There was one theory that circulated around that the ship accidentally, somehow, went into Lake Ontario or Lake Huron. This is unlikely because the ship would have had to navigate through Detroit, through Lake St. Clair, and through another channel to get into Lake Huron. It's very unlikely the ship would have been able to do that blind, and also it could not have gotten into Lake Ontario without knowing, due to the fact that there were locks there, and at the time, it was very hard for a lot of ships to get to Lake Ontario due to Niagara Falls. Throughout the coming weeks, and even years, the bodies of multiple crew were found, including Captain Robert McLeod. The body of the sole passenger, as well as 10 other crew members, were never found. And with that, it's time to get into some theories. Theory 1 is the most credible theory. It's simply that the ship went missing somewhere over here in Lake Erie, around where this arrow is pointing, because north, on the Canadian side, there's a lot of wells that are constantly maintained. If the ship was around that area, it would have been found by now. Around the area where this arrow is pointing to, there's not much activity going on, and the lake is at its deepest, which isn't saying much. Theory 2 states that the ship is basically in the same position, however it's buried under the silt, something that has happened with at least one other shipwreck in Lake Erie. I kind of already dived into the third theory, but it's basically that the ship went into either Lake Ontario or Lake Huron. This is, of course, impossible, but it's still something that has conspiracy theorists talking till this day. Theory 4 is the worst of these theories, and it's that the ship sailed into a port, got a name change, turned into one of the other many sister ships that it had across the Great Lakes, and it's all part of a big cover-up. And oh boy, this is such a bad theory. And this theory actually has some truth to it. You see, after the ship sank, the company built another ship once again named the Marquette and Bessemer number 2. The families were enraged, saying it should have been named the number 3, and that they were trying to forget the incident, which they kinda were. Eventually, that ship would become a coal barge and survive until the 1990s. The main way you can tell apart the two ships, by the way, is the fact that one of them has a small bridge on top. Alright, so that's all well and dandy, but how did the ship sink? Well, it's actually pretty clear how the ship sank. You see, some of the ships had a gate at the back, but some were literally an open back ship. This Marquette and Bessemer number 2, the first one, was this. The captain had actually complained a couple months ago that the ship had almost foundered in a giant storm. The company was set to install ramps at the back, but they never did. In fact, funny enough, the Milwaukee, which I mentioned earlier, also disappeared and was later found. The reason? The cars and the cargo had come loose and had broken open the stern ramp, causing water to flood the engine room, then the flicker, or the crew quarters, and the ship later sank. So it's very likely that this could have been the downfall of all 3 of the Logan boats that eventually sank. With a relatively tall car ferry somehow disappearing in a relatively shallow lake, no one who has the equipment wanting to search the areas, and the ship forever gone from the Great Lakes history books, the mystery of where the Marquette and Bessemer number 2 now lays will remain unsolved.